Today, I have a neat little study that I wanted to bring to your attention, published in the journal Advancing Earth and Space Science. Now, almost 5 decades ago, the Apollo astronauts returned from their mission to the moon. Even though these astronauts were immortalized as the first humans to ever set foot on a cosmic object outside the bounds of the Earth, they were still mortal. They were still flesh and bone and blood. And no amount of triumph and glory for the human species could prevent them from suffering after exposure to a literal alien environment. The returning Apollo astronauts had suffered mild respiratory problems because the suits that they used to go walk around on the moon had gotten coated in moon dust. This moon dust stayed on the suits as they returned to the space shuttle, and they breathed it in on their way back home. This caused lung and throat irritation, and it gave the astronauts mild breathing difficulty. Now, even though they just had, quote, mild breathing difficulty, this is a big deal. Any colonists who come to the moon in the future, be they some kind of temporary worker like a visiting astronaut or a shift worker at a mining station, or be they permanent residents that live in dome cities that dot the surface of the moon, whatever the case, they'll inevitably be exposed to moon dust. And if that exposure is harmful, we want to know about it now so that we can work out solutions before more people get hurt. The researchers behind the study used lunar soil simulants and applied them to cultures of neural cells and cultures of lung cells. Their results were stark, and the conclusions were very clear. From their abstract, the researchers say, and I quote, "Lunar soil simulants were capable of causing cell death and DNA damage in neuronal and lung cell lines, and freshly crushed lunar soil simulants were more effective at causing cell death and DNA damage than were simulants as received from the supplier." Unquote. This is a really important detail to take into consideration. The crushed lunar dust was more damaging due to the fact that the particles were more jagged and irregular, and thus more dangerous to soft lung cells. Here on Earth, we have an atmosphere that has wind, and we have liquid water that falls from the sky as rain, that runs over the landscape as rivers and glaciers, and that beats at the edges of the continents as the endless tide. All of these geochemical processes will degrade and weather Earth rocks. They erode them, grinding them down and smoothing their edges. River rocks that you can pull out of the stream behind your house are smooth and round, and even dust particles are often rounded as they get swept across a landscape by the wind, or as they get crushed to a fine silt by the weight of a glacier. Now, on the moon, there is no wind. There is no atmosphere. There's no water, so there's no rain, there's no rivers, and there's no tides beating against the coast. There's no oceans, so there is no coast. The lunar surface is nothing but sterile soil, blanketing a quiet, rugged landscape of craters and undulating plains. With no erosion, the rocks don't get worn down. When an impactor hits the moon and breaks up some rocks, the edges are sharp, and they stay that way forever. The dust is the same way, as all these microscopic particles are as sharp and jagged as freshly broken glass. This study is important, even though it seems relatively simple and straightforward, with a somewhat obvious conclusion. But it's important because if we're to colonize the moon, or if we're to colonize anywhere else in our solar system, we have to understand the local environment and how that will affect a human body. Naturally, we'll want to use this data to take precautions and create a viable habitat. And to do that, we have to make sure that our lunar colonists aren't stuck there breathing in the lunar equivalent of dust from shattered glass.